So this is in the 90s, and you are a purple belt at the time. When did you develop this leg lock system that has become so legendary? So for the uninitiated that have never heard of you or understand what we're talking about here, for the longest time, jiu-jitsu was primarily attacks on the arms and the neck. That was pretty much it. And there were known attacks on the legs, but they were frowned upon.
Yes.
Something happened. You got to see some of those techniques in MMA. You got to see some heel hooks, occasionally foot locks. There's a few guys, Orlovsky pulled off a foot lock in the UFC against Tim Sylvia. There's a few guys that were pulling these off. This is pre-Husamar Palhares. But you all of a sudden came along with this very effective system that there was rumblings many years ago about this, where a lot of people were talking about it. And a lot of people were saying that, John Danaher has this insane leg lock system. And then you started developing all these. For people who don't know, the top grapplers in the world, there's a lot of top grapplers in the world. Jiu-jitsu is incredibly competitive, but you're recognized as being one of the premier coaches of the most promising young people, like Gordon Ryan, who you're talking about before, who's an Abu Dhabi champion, Gary Tonin, Nicky Ryan, Eddie Cummings. You have an incredible crew of world-class strangle artists who are also known to be some of the very best leg lockers in the world. So what happened? How did that all take place?
Let's go through...
We should talk about the history of
taboo. You've actually asked about 6 different questions.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, it's good, but we can answer them in turn. So let's go. The first question. Your first question was a historical question. How did it happen?
Yeah.
Okay. First off, there was nothing in my early learnings of jiu-jitsu which suggested leg locks. Nothing. Okay. Renzo would teach. By the way, I should say my sensei throughout my entire career has been Renzo Gracie. I never left Renzo. He taught me from white belt to black belt, and I never left his academy. I'm the only one of his students who stayed with him from white belt to black belt and never left. So Renzo would teach leg locks, but it was taught in always the same fashion that everyone else did. Here's a move, here's a figure 4 toe hold, here's a heel hook, here's an Achilles lock. So the moves themselves were known. Okay, they were in existence. It wasn't like I invented heel hooks or something like that. That's not the idea. But they weren't emphasized. A very, very talented and influential figure in my life was a guy that I only knew for 3 days. Now that sounds crazy, right? How can you learn something from someone in 3 days? Well, actually, the influence he had occurred in 3 minutes. I'm a big believer in the idea that someone can come into your life for a very short period of time and have a massive influence. I truly believe that. In my case, it was a great American grappler called Dean Lister. Dean Lister was invited by Matt Serra to come to the Renzo Gracie Academy. I believe, don't quote me on this, but I believe Dean was a brown belt at the time. I'm pretty sure Matt was a brown belt at the time too. And I brought him in for around 3 days, and he trained mostly with Matt Serra in preparation for a grappling tournament, if I remember correctly. Now, Dean was known mostly in those days for his Achilles lock. Later on, he would become a heel hook specialist, but in those days, it was mostly an Achilles lock. And he came to the academy, he rolled with some people, and he was doing Achilles locks and getting some success. It went both ways. I remember he couldn't really get his stuff to work on Matt Serra, and Matt Serra could get his stuff to work on him. But he was doing something which was unusual. And so I talked with him just briefly after class, and I said, that's interesting what you're doing with these Achilles locks, because I don't really do that at all. It's not something I do. And he said one sentence which completely changed my outlook. He said, why would you ignore 50% of the human body? One sentence. Why would you ignore 50% of the human body? And I looked and I was like, I don't know. Why would you? It makes no sense. And we never talked again. And then he went back to California. He went on to become two-time ADCC champion, mostly with leg locks. But what Dean gave me was not technique, didn't show me a single technique. but he gave me a point of view. And if you give a man a point of view, you can change him. Okay, he can work from there. That was the influence. And my sensei, Hensel Gracie, was an extremely liberal-minded professor of jiu-jitsu. He would let us do whatever we wanted. Okay, he wasn't one of those guys who, no one in my academy is studying leg locks. He was never like that. He would allow his students to go in any direction they wanted, provided they could prove it was effective. So I started studying leg locks, and that's where I'm going to come to the second question, which you asked, which is, why did leg locks have such a bad reputation in jiu-jitsu? It's curious, right? We don't talk about this way about arm locks. I'm going to run through the main criticisms, and you'll be my witness on this, Joe. I'm sure you heard the same criticisms 1,000 times. You would always hear people refer to leg locks in the following way. The first criticism, they were too dangerous. Okay, if you allowed people to do leg locks, everyone would be injured in a week, and jiu-jitsu would be impossible. So that was the first criticism you would always hear. The second great criticism is they didn't work. Okay, you might be able to tap out a white belt with a heel hook, but if you're at world championship level, you're never going to tap anybody. They didn't work at high levels. That by itself, those two criticisms seem to go in opposite directions. If they're really that dangerous, but they don't work, how do those two gel? They're either incredibly dangerous to the point where they can't be practiced, or they don't work. The two arguments contradict each other. Then you would hear other arguments that they were positionally unsound. That if you were in top position and you went for a leg lock, you would lose position, and that was a disaster. Okay, that's a criticism with no merit, because that same criticism applies to guillotines, arm bars, etc. You can be mounted on someone, go for an arm lock and lose position and end up on bottom, but no one criticizes arm bars. So as I went through the reasons why people criticized leg locking, none of them really made sense. So I started asking myself, well, often the reasons people give, as opposed to what the real reasons are very different. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought the real reason people don't like leg locks runs much deeper than that. Let's understand jiu-jitsu for what it is. Jiu-jitsu is a systems-based approach to fighting.